My name is Shana Carroll. I am one of the Seven Fingers, Les Sept Doigts de la Main, which is the company that created this show, Cuisine Confessions, and several other shows. So I'm one of the founding artistic directors, and I'm also director and choreographer of this show here in this theater. And have done many other things, including working with these two people at other times of my life. Would you like to?
Yeah. My name is Lorenzo Pisoni. I have no connection really to this panel at all. No, I was a circus performer for many years, and then I retired to become an actor, which was not a good choice. And my sister Gypsy is one of the founding members of Les Sept Doigts. And now I'm a writer and director of physical comedy and an actor. Yeah, and I've known this woman for. Well, she's known me longer than I've been alive, I think.
That's true. Yeah. Wow. That's possible because his parents were my partners. We started the Pickle Family Circus, where I also met Shana's father, and where Shana started, and where she worked with Lorenzo when he was 12. This is the family section.
Yeah.
So that's how we all know each other, which is not uncommon if you work in circus. Sort of, you can't get out. It's a generational thing. I work for Circus Flora, which is based out of St. Louis.
Yeah, so I think it's actually great fun to speak about circus dramaturgy. I feel like obviously dramaturgy has existed in circus as long as circus has existed. It's just recent that I think it's actually being labeled dramaturgy, and the conversation is happening as such. And it actually reminds me, going back to speaking about working at the Pickle Family Circus with Lorenzo when he was 12 years old. The reason I ended up becoming a circus performer, I was an actress that became a circus performer, but I did theater as a teenager, and at 18 I saw Pickles. My father was involved with, he was a writer and wrote their book, and so he was really involved with the company and was encouraging me to go and learn more about it. And that year there was a part of Pickles that was called Café des Artistes, which was a whole cafe scene where everyone had characters, and every one of the numbers, there was always some dramatic setting for the fact, the guy has to climb the chairs to get the thing and all of that. And because it was a form of theater, that's what made me fall in love with circus, whereas earlier, when I'd seen other traditional circuses, which are also wonderful, but as for my own taste as a teenager, it was not something that interested me. So, the roots of my interest in circus was, in fact, for its sort of storytelling capacities and this feeling that through circus, sometimes there's even a more apt way or articulate way of expressing certain emotions and themes and symbols that we can't just say with words and movement. So I think that was my big draw to it. So in fact, the notion of dramaturgy is right at the source. And then I feel like from that first introduction, every time, if I was approaching, I started as a trapeze artist. I was a trapeze artist for 20 years before founding the company. And if I was creating an act, whether it was my own act or working with other people, it was important to me that each act, like a monologue, had its own dramatic arc and was there to express something and to evolve and say something. Whereas I think another way of doing circus dramaturgy often is that there's a storyline, and yet the story gives a little window or an excuse to do an act, but it's just sort of a demonstration, but the act itself is not furthering the story or conveying intention and stakes and all sorts of things. So I feel like that's also really been at the heart of everything that I have done since 1988. I have more bullet points. Would you like to add something?
Well, first, does the mic go off and on, or is it always on?
Maybe it was me.
No. Okay. No, but I think now that we've sorted out the technical aspects of this talk, I think there is something inherent with circus. My father has always said that circus is inherently metaphorical, walking a thin line, all these kind of metaphors that we use in everyday life manifest themselves in the circus, whether you realize it or not. So there is this kind of inherent theatricality in the storytelling. And also, a lot of ways that people create acts is also a story of evolution, where you start out in a very basic way and you start to then build and build and build, and by the time the artist is done with their act, you've kind of watched them mature in a way. And I think that that's an amazing kind of thing to see in real time. So the idea of circus dramaturgy in that sense is almost inherent. But as Shana was saying, how now people are starting to have panel discussions and kind of really dissect it. Right. This might be the first one, right? But I think that also, even in just traditional circus, there is this way that the show itself tells a story of this group of people, and you can't get away from it. Whether or not there is that frame that is either like really forced upon it, or if it's just, here is a group of artists, and this is the Charivari in the very beginning, and then this is these little acts, and then all of a sudden you have some sort of finale. I think as an audience member, you go on this ride. Do you want to speak to that?
I also think because circus is so emotional, or should be, and usually is, because watching someone do something at the heights, like poetry is heightened, words, it has that, to me it has that same excitement, and when we lose that, we lose what is the core of circus, which is of course also drama, just in itself.
Also, I feel like, well, first of all, circus is a physically expressive language like dance, and like dance is given both to abstract representation and literal storytelling as well. And I think it has that capacity to have the flexibility, and some shows are much more in an abstract realm, and some are more in a physical theater storytelling, and sometimes it's a bit of both, which actually I think this show is a bit of, moving in between the two. But sometimes I like to compare it to, like in a musical, when the performers break out into song and dance, for it to work, we need to feel like they have to break out in a song and dance. The only way to express this motion or idea is by singing it and dancing it. And I feel like acrobatics, for me, when it works best, is when we feel like, for whatever reason, that is the only way to express this metaphor or emotion or confession, and honing into that. I think that that's a part of creating shows, is sort of identifying, particular apparatus or disciplines that, they have their own language, just like Lorenzo was saying, they have their own metaphors, they have their own, being on a trapeze and you're caught between earth and sky, and you have these two polar poles, and what does that say, and what is it for the performer? Circus performers have really intense relationships with their apparatus and with their disciplines, and honing into that and trying to figure out, okay, if this was a freeing experience, and can we magnify this that story within it? So I was going to say that. The other thing is, circus artists, not only they have this intense relationship with their disciplines, but they're not trained actors and dancers. Sorry. Yeah, I had a little bit. No, I'm here. But they actually can be amazing actors and dancers when you really use them in their element. And it can be really authentic, and movement-wise, you can find really something, because it's not trained, everyone learns the same moves, you can find a really kind of genuine, raw, physical vocabulary, and same as with them playing characters. They really have this capacity to kind of hone into something very real, because circus so much is about individuating. When you create your act, it's like what makes you different, and so they spend a long time kind of figuring out what their style and language is. So along those lines, for me, when I create a show, and I think in Seven Fingers in general, I like to think of it as two halves of a shell, because we always want to take the performers as the base, and use their energy and their personality and their stories, because I feel like that's when you get the best dramaturgic results, really. And yet, as creators, you also want to tell your stories and have your vision. So I sort of feel like what we try to do is see how those two halves of the shell can actually interlock, and together what that composite puzzle of a show can be. And that's sort of, it's an interesting sort of, coming at it two angles at once process. And we do have a lot of Seven Fingers.
And also at Circus Flora, which I direct the theater part of, is similar in that you have a framework, but then it totally depends on the people. You can't, and that is what's so frightening. I can't tell you how terrifying it is. Usually about this time, a month before we go to rehearsal, people ask me about the show, and I can't stand to talk about it. I'm so frightened.
Yeah.
Because I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right.
And it's terrifying in terms of the longevity of the show. I mean, even if I think about this show now, last night there was a moment when I was worried someone, won't get into it, oh, did they hurt me? And then, of course, if that person is out, the entire show, and when we replace people because we want to make it so specific to that person's story, we end up, if we bring a new person in, we sort of rewrite the show as we go. So the idea of the show having a script, it needs to be, on the one hand, there needs to be sort of, pillars in the script that, okay, this is the essence of the show that we have to maintain for the show to stay on its rails. And then a whole other kind of surrounding part needs to be flexible and, so that when new people come in, we can make it personal to them as well.
Yeah. I think we've all experienced going to see a circus that has a narrative and it feels disingenuous because I feel like there are people and companies that will try to force a show on a group of performers that shouldn't exist there. And I think that it's really smart to have a structure and then also be terrified that it may not work given the personnel, and then be able to say, okay, well, let's scrap that and try this, or to really tailor it to who you've got, because as you said, circus performers, circus artists, they have such a tense relationship to what they do. To deny that is to take away an incredibly important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
And why would you do that? It seems like there's gold there. So get out of the way. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I would add, not to, I don't want to say negative things about other shows, but about what you're saying about shows when the storytelling seems disingenuous, I think it also comes from often when directors who are not really familiar with circus and don't see it as a theatrical device. They see it as, okay, they're going to direct a circus show and find ways of weaving theater around the circus. And like I was saying earlier, just, okay, now this is, okay, they're birds, so they can do this act. So, and I think that's also where, we feel the disconnect. Instead of using the acrobatics as, it's the heart of the show, the circus performance. It's hard to ignore, 6 minutes of someone risking their life and treat it like a footnote in the story. So I feel like that it also has to do with the perception of, I think people are becoming more and more educated about circus and acrobatics and its potential to be theatrical, but often there is a stigma that it's just spectacle, and okay, now we have an excuse to flip around, let's get back to the story, which is unfortunate. And
except flipping around is really cool, so sometimes you just want to say like, hey, go flip around for 6 minutes. I love that. I think that it is not to knock other circus, because traditional circus is an amazing thing. And as I was saying before, I will go see a traditional circus and be happy about it. Because it is inherently dramatic, as Cecil was saying. Just to see a performer walk into the ring, they've spent so many hours just for that one prop. Like it's intense. And worthy. Just so that we're clear that we're not just contemporary circus is the only thing we got.
And actually also along those lines of that there's not just one way, there are many truths. Even in the process, I was explaining for me what I really, what I enjoy as the main process when we create a seven-finger show, which tend to be smaller and intimate. We have a cast that we choose, and we create a show with them. I have often also worked on other shows that tend to be, bigger and collaborations, where we start with, the magic flute, and then I read the script, and I'm like, okay, there's a dagger, we could do a knife thing, there's water, let's do an umbrella, and you can also derive you can take source material and figure out how it can be expressed through acrobatics. And I think that does take a good knowledge of acrobatics and circus to make those choices and make them also seem connected and real. But that's another process, and it's actually a lot of fun too. So there's different ways of doing it.
Yeah. And so the show I direct is in a tent with sawdust animals. So I don't really believe in this difference between contemporary circus and traditional circus. I think it's a vision of a show, personally. And I feel like, as with everything, we should stop dividing into different things.
And
We have 60, 70 people between grooms and the band and, all this huge things going on. But I think our aim is pretty much the same, and
No, and actually, I think I often say this about Montreal. I think Montreal has become really a hub for circus, and it's schools and communities of circus and many, many companies. And I feel like one of the reasons is that they don't have really that division of contemporary and traditional. Everyone's just doing circus, and within the same circus school, someone who's more drawn by a traditional style will create an act that's very, more on, cabaret style, and then someone goes completely avant-garde and is doing something with, clay and anyway, and one thing that happened in France, there still is a huge contemporary circus movement in France, and of course there's a long traditional circus history, and it got really polarized. It was like Democrats and Republicans, where the contemporary circus hated the traditional circus people, and vice versa, and I think it was really unhealthy for the evolution of circus, because then they just started staying in their boxes in order to make a point in some ways. And I think that we actually, when we're kind of considered contemporary circus, but when we tour France, we're accused of being more traditional because, our numbers are on music and we, people clap in it. And, so it's really, it's true. And I think, that's one thing that we've sort of also tried to embrace is both Gypsy obviously comes from Pickles and, has that deep love for the roots of it all and using, really, just like any creator, you use what you like, and put it here and there. So,
should we take questions? You want to ask them?
Yeah. Just on a sidebar, one of the most amazing circus experiences that I've ever had was at the Moscow State Circus in Moscow, which is pretty traditional, and I got picked by the clown, and it was. There's a moment of stepping into the ring and realizing this is the only time that I will have a chance to perform with the Moscow State Circus, and it was glorious. I tried to do what he wanted me to do, and not mess him up, and it was great. And coming from where Pickles and and obviously being really proud of Shana and my sister and. Having that kind of scope of where, there's more, whatever division of circus and whatever it is, but just to really love that traditional scope of their circus was so mind-blowing. And just to look up into the rigging and see all the stuff that they weren't using that show, it was just, I don't know, sorry, it was just an amazing thing. Yeah, so question?
Yeah, do we want to do questions? People have questions? Yeah.
I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to start with one and then you can come back to me. I'm curious about, so as a company that I'm a huge fan of, and you guys, in my opinion, you guys do it the best as far as storytelling and excitement. So keep that up. I'm sure you will. I just wanted to know more about your process. What is the time frame from, not obviously we all get an idea and then we mull over it for years and years, but from when you decide to do the show to when do you write the outline or the set list or the script to actual rehearsal process to when it goes up?
Okay, I'll generalize because it's
sure. Of course, it's always different.
Exactly. So what we tend to do actually is we cast it bbefore anything else.
You cast it first.
Yeah, because I think particularly, the kinds of shows we like to do where there's we want really multi-talented people who aren't just going to do one act and can do, first of all, several acrobatic disciplines quite often because it's a small cast and you have to do a 90-minute show, but also who are good actors and dancers and are open-minded about doing those things and are amazing people and performers. There's a whole human side of it too that we definitely don't like casting assholes. So, but
that's a good rule.
Yeah, very good rule. We do a pretty good job, I have to say. So anyway, so we cast first, and so that really often informs the direction the show is going to go in. And we, with the example of Traces, that was 100% fueled by, these were kids we knew, actually, the 4 boys, we knew them since they were children in San Francisco. We wanted to create a show with them, and the entire concept of the show was based on their energy, their talents. How can we put that into into light and create a concept that functions with their natural energy and anyway. So that's an example of how it starts from there. And then, like I said, sometimes it's two halves of the show, like with this show where we were inspired by the cast and their cultures and their energy. But the cooking idea came more from my husband and myself, who were directors, and he's incredibly passionate about cooking. So it was like trying to combine something that, like I said, that we really want to talk about with what they're giving us. And just timeline-wise, we have the cast. I would say even like idea-wise, like when I did Sequence 8, we started day one. I had no idea. I was like blank page creation. Let's just get into the room, start improv.
And how far out was that from opening night?
4 months. So basically I'd say we do 1 month where we do mostly just workshop, where we do improv. I'm a huge believer in improv. And they're all, they're theme-directed improvs. You get an idea, like I'll give again the example of Sequence 8, where they had incredibly close relationships among them. And so already we were kind of steering towards this idea of the other and these intense relationships you have in your 20s and kind of breaking barriers and all the different ways the other is represented. So we were already kind of thinking that, so we would give them an improv, okay, let's do something based on echoing mirrors, cause and effect. So, we kind of give them these themes around the main theme. So we do that for about a month, and we just it's like the throwing pasta on the wall portion of the creation, and get so much raw material. And then from that, you kind of see like the little essential oil that surfaces, and sometimes like in creating a certain act, they'll do an improv, and sometimes it's just one gesture. Okay, that's the essence of the act. Okay, now we can build it. Like, now I got it. Like, okay, I see the pole is representative of marriage. Okay, now I got it. Whatever. The fog kind of clears. So, month of workshop. In the case of Cuisine, a lot of that time was them just telling stories of their past, because we needed that side of the raw material. Second month is when we create the acts. We really focus on the acts themselves because there's training involved, and and it's a much more detailed process. And so I would say that's, we're still writing the story at the same time, but really in the rehearsal room of the cast, we're creating the acts. The third month is when we kind of do all the other stuff and all of the scenes and links and arc and changes. So, and then fourth month, we're in previews, I guess. Yeah. So that's more or less the process, which, as I said, can change. Would you like to mention? Yeah.
Well, I think you always start from the cast in any circus. I mean, usually you have an idea, but who's in it you can't create anything out of it until you know that, and then of course that changes, which is heartbreaking. And then you have to.
You get good new people.
Yes, no, but that moment is heartbreaking, and but I think it always. I don't know how else it starts except from that.
And Flora, how much time do you have for Flora?
We don't have any time.
Like,
Well, I work 6 months on it and have a composer and designers, but actual rehearsal is 2 weeks total. I mean, because we have to pay salaries to so many people. So that's heartbreaking.
We're in Canada. Canada is good.
A government.
5 minutes. And actually, this actually goes back to the purpose of, not purpose, but the subject of this panel. Quebec is the only province in Canada where circus is considered an art form, which means it's eligible for arts funding. It's actually, you can get grants on the national level, but you have to fit into the theater funding or the dance funding. You're not a category in and of yourself. So Quebec is moving forward in that respect, and so I'm hoping the rest of the world will follow. But yeah, no, it is nice to. Is there? Yes, yeah.
So I'm trying to break into the field of circus studies, and I'm actually presenting a paper this summer on traces. And one question I have is, like, I feel in circus there's this like constant reconciling of like letting people know how hard you're working while also trying to like maintain control and let it appear as like ease and graceful.
Yeah.
But also, what role do you think that plays in your direction and choreography of like?
So, I mean, I think it's a philosophical thing. I mean, I think quite often the goal of circus, which is also, I mean, like ballet or something, where it's about, just being extraordinary and superhuman, and like, oh my God, this person is, I don't know what planet they came from, how can they do these things, they're just so amazing. And that is it's an amazing, incredible, uplifting experience to think that a human being can do that. Personally, I like the vulnerability, and I like understanding that actually this is a normal person that is trained really fucking hard, and and has put their blood, sweat, and tears into it, and you can too if you. So I enjoy that angle. So I think when we create shows, and I would say the same for Gypsy, when we create shows, it's not that we try to, we never say, oh, let's miss this trick on purpose. I mean, no acrobat wants to miss a trick on purpose. But we're aware that there's an element of fragility that we don't shy away from. That sometimes, even if a trick isn't 100%, we put it in because that's what it's about for them anyway. It's pushing those limits, and it's okay if it misses sometimes. It doesn't have to be absolute perfection. And even theme-wise, I mean, I think the vulnerability, I mean, what it takes to risk your life for an audience every day. I mean, it's amazing what these people are doing on stage, and trying to choose themes that properly show that vulnerability in a way. So I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, with circus in general too, I don't know that you want to show the effort as much as allow it to be present if it's happening. If you're really tired that day and you see that, and you're out of breath, instead of trying to mask the fact that you're out of breath, because I think that's often what's wonderful about circus is the humanity. And for me, Traces in particular was about the humanity. And that heartbeat at the end for the hoop act in particular. It's like that, it's human. And we all have a heart, we all breathe hard, and we all risk our life, every day, getting in a car or whatever you have to do. So, I don't know. Are we answering that question?
Yeah, that's good. One more question?
One more question, I think, yeah?
All right, so you're talking a lot about casting, and it's kind of a two-part question of how well you know these people as individuals when you cast them, as friends, as personal relationships, and also in your process of working with them, how do you get the most out of them? Granted, they're changing moods and different personalities, and how that works for you in the room.
Okay, I'll answer the second part first. I believe you get the most out of them with love. It's like me being a mom here, but I mean, I do think that that's true, that if you really kind of, as you're working with people, if you're looking at them with loving eyes and trying to, imagine that, you're seeing the most lovable quality in them and trying to get that out, I think that that's contagious. Sorry, I feel like I'm a mom, but it's true, and I think that that's, and you do get maternal. I mean, I get maternal with the cast, and in fact, that's one thing that I think is the most stressful thing, is, watching them and worrying they're going to get hurt. I mean, it's more than, oh, I hope, we get a good review. I mean, it's really, that's the main, agonizing element of being a circus director. So that's the second part of the question. I mean, it depends how well we know this. We like to cast people we know because of the asshole thing I was saying earlier. It's, when we have a good experience, if we've worked with someone, had a great experience working with them, we're going to want to work with them again. And then there's, often we taught at the circus school, so often we know the students before they graduate, or we do a certain event and we meet someone. I've worked on some Cirque du Soleil shows, and like Matthias, who was in this show, it's amazing. I worked with him on a Cirque du Soleil show in Los Angeles, and in fact, as soon as the first day I started working with him, I said, look, if you ever want to come work for Seven Fingers, because he was just a dream to work with.
You were poaching from Cirque du Soleil?
I said, when your contract's over. So we do try. I mean, there's times like there's 4 students, artists in the show who were students at the circus school that we did not know very well. However, a good friend who's a coach there had been working with them and said, oh, these guys, they're great. So then we had them over for dinner. I mean, we really do try to take time to get to know them. It's not always that idealistic. Like sometimes we've cast people off of videos, but we always try to do our homework. And circus is a small world, so you ask around people who've worked with other people, and so yeah. Actually, I do want to say something. In this show, so there's Matthias, who I said, who I met in Cirque du Soleil, and he's Argentinian, and we had 2 spots left in the show, and I said, okay, we really need like a juggler who's also a porter, but that's really hard to find, and who's like a good dancer, like a good mover, and then we need a girl who's really, like a good dancer and has different energy. Anyway, I gave him the script, and he said, oh, I have 2 friends, and I just trusted him. And he recommended Pablo and Gabby, who you'll see in the show, who were amazing. And so there's an example who I didn't know at all, and they arrived the first day, and I said, well, thank you, Matthias. Like, what an amazing recommendation. So, yeah. Yes.
Because Cecil, you see everything.
Yeah, well, that's the other part of that, is going to see every show you can, so you know who's out there and what they're doing. Because people send you videos and stuff, but it's hard to tell from videos. So seeing acts. But I often hire not knowing, and sometimes make huge mistakes. Yeah, it does. But then you do hire back, and like it's a small world, and as the world actually has grown of circus, in this generation, there's lots more information than there used to be.
I got the signal, yeah.
Thank you very much for coming, and yeah.